Hey everybody, welcome back to Jay's Fifth Down, the football podcast. I'm your host, Jay and Gay, here today with Brandon Marcello, college football reporter at 247 Sports. Brandon, thank you for joining us today, talking some college football. We got a lot to get into, man, but we appreciate you coming on.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. College
Yeah,
football's back, man. I'm pumped.
yes, me too. A lot of us are. It's been too long. But before we get started, please make sure you guys check us out here on YouTube, subscribe, share, like. We're also on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your favorite podcasts. We're there. So check us out. So, Brandon, 2022 college football season, a lot to get into. But first off, who are some teams that are on your radar this year? Some teams to watch out for, maybe some sleeper teams. Who are you on the lookout for this year?
Well, I think they talk about clear cut four good teams, but there's probably like 7 or 8 that I think of legit like playoff teams you look at right now in the preseason. But outside that, I'm really excited to see some teams with some either new quarterbacks or going like into the second system in their year in their system. So, for example, I'm kind of an SEC guy because I've been in the South my entire life, but I'm really interested to see Tennessee this year after the way they just put up numbers like crazy offensively last season. And to me, Tennessee reminds me a lot of like Ole Miss going into last season. Ole Miss was a team that if they could just gotten like one step better defensively from 2020 to 2021, you felt like they had a chance to be really good. And they did just that. I mean, they went from having an historically bad defense to a respectable one. And they won 10 games in the regular season for the first time ever in school history. I think Tennessee is very similar. They were terrible on third downs with third down defense. They were able to get to the quarterback. I think they were second in the SEC and in the top 10 nationally in TFLs and or sacks. But third downs, they just couldn't get off the field, and that killed them. They were among the worst in the country. And so if they can improve defensively, I think Tennessee could be a surprise team that maybe contends and wins 10 games somehow, even against that schedule. But when we talk about like teams that might compete for the playoff that maybe people aren't necessarily talking a lot about or maybe aren't really giving a lot of respect, I look at Utah, which I know some people are saying is a playoff team, but they're the most physical team out west of the Mississippi River. If you watched them last year, they just pushed teams around. I mean, you watched Oregon, everybody, that was Mario Cristobal's thing. It's like, we're going to just kill people in the trenches. We're going to bring this kind of SEC type mentality, Big Ten mentality to the Pac-12. And boy, Utah just absolutely owned Utah in the trench or Oregon in the trenches in both games last season. And
Yeah.
outside of like Utah, UCLA, and Fresno State, to me, were the most physical teams out west last season. But Utah was number one. If Utah continues to do that and they win that opener against Florida, which listen, I think that game is going to be very tough for them to win. But if Florida, if they beat Florida in that first game, I like Utah to potentially go undefeated this season.
Interesting.
I think Florida is one of their toughest games this year, to be quite honest. Even with it's the opener, you got to be in the swamp.
Yeah.
I've been down there. I mean, I used to cover Auburn. And they went down there. I can't remember what year that was. It was Bo Nix's first year, I think, as a starting quarterback. And they couldn't do anything. It was one of the loudest stadiums I've ever been in. And that place is formidable, especially when it's early in the year and it's hot and it's literally swampy and humid. Utah's not used to that. I've been out in Utah. There's no humidity like that. It's dry. They always say dry heat out there, and it's true. So, but Utah, they beat Florida. I really like them to maybe run the table this season and get into the playoff. Now, I don't think they win a national title, but I think they could run through the Pac-12. Outside that, I could go all day about teams I'm really interested in, but like that's my two like major things. It's like Utah, I think I've got a lot of belief in and potentially, but it's so weird to say like they got to get past week one. Like if they get past week one, I like them the rest of the year. But also like Tennessee is just so fascinating to me. And listen, Tennessee might fall flat on their face now, but if their defense is good, much better than it was on third downs last year, I like them to surprise some folks.
Yeah, I agree. Tennessee, the last couple of seasons, has been disappointing to say the least. But as you said, the defense improved a season ago, and just the only thing with them, I guess, is just having some consistency at the quarterback position and offensively. And if they can get that clicking at some point, I believe they can get that program back on track. But you mentioned Florida. Now, what do you think is key for them to have a good season here in the SEC?
Their depth concerns me at every position. I think Anthony Richardson, the quarterback there, could be something special, but they got to keep him upright and healthy. He can't feel like he's got to do too much running around with the ball because he was turnover prone last year and he felt like he had to carry the team, and he was only coming in spot duty really, in relief appearances. Now it's on him. That's his team. He's got to be able to kind of almost play reserved at times. He can't go full out every single play because that's when he starts making mistakes. If he can do that, but also have that big play when he needs it to improvise, so to speak, he's a big running back. I say big quarterback, but he's like a running back when he runs. He's so big. Mm-hmm. He adds a different dimension that not many teams nationally have anymore. They don't really go after those type of big running quarterbacks. There's Anthony in the SEC. There's Anthony Richardson, and then there's KJ Jefferson at Arkansas, really, that are like those big type of quarterbacks that can take some hits, but also deliver some hits to some linebackers if they have to running the ball. But Florida, they just don't have the depth. I'm not so sure that they've got everything in place to be consistent week in and week out. They might Florida might be that type of team that just upsets someone, and we're just like, whoa. I mean, heck, they might beat Utah by 2 touchdowns, and then end up not, having another solid win and just finishing with 5 wins or 6 wins. I'm being serious. They've got that starting talent, but they're not deep. They got a quarterback who, even in limited spot duty, we haven't seen a lot of them, made some mistakes, turnover prone, but it's a lot of questions about Florida. Florida is going to be that's like a 2-3 year project for Billy Napier. They got to turn the recruiting around. They've got to build that depth. They got to keep kids on the field. And they got to buy into that culture. That's not going to be a turnaround job for Florida. And to keep it local there, Brian Kelly at LSU, I think that's a turnaround job that could happen faster here in the next year or two. Napier, I think that's at the very least 2 to 3 years at Florida.
Yeah, agreed. That process is going to be a while for Florida to get back to where they want to be as a program. But moving elsewhere in, the SEC, as you mentioned earlier, once we started, of course they dropped the top 4 teams, before each season, and I think it was this year was Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, and Clemson, if I'm correct. So with that being said, those 4 teams being listed as the top 4, do you think that's how it's going to roll out this year? Are Alabama and Georgia going to be able to recreate, that championship run, maybe meet, or can another team shock them and, make an appearance themselves in the national championship? What do you think? What's key for Alabama and Georgia to repeat and get back to the big game?
Yeah, I'm sold on Alabama. I think this Alabama team, if it goes right and they stay healthy, could end up being the best team they've ever had, which is saying something. I mean, that team they had 2 years ago, I think even trumped the one that was at LSU offensively in 19 with Joe Burrow. I thought that Alabama team in 2020 was special just because of the pandemic and what they were doing and just demolishing everybody. And with Devontae Smith and those guys, this year I think they'll even be better because they're going to be more rounded defensively. This will get back to those kind of Saban defenses we've seen from 5 to 10 years ago. Because that defense has actually been kind of trajectorying down a little bit over the last 4 years, and it's kind of leveled off. It's kind of like a top 15 unit now instead of being a top 3 or top 5 unit. I think the unit this year is going to be top 5, top 3. Listen, Will Anderson Jr. is the best player in college football, regardless of position. Fantastic pass rusher. And really what's made him go was the introduction of Dallas Turner, the freshman, outside linebacker who got introduced into the starting lineup halfway through the season last year out of necessity because of injuries. And he blossomed quickly, and that took a lot of attention off Will Anderson Jr. And Will Anderson Jr., you should see his stats. They just ballooned after that in the second half of the year. So now they're both on the field from game one, and you add in some of the pieces and the experience they've got coming back along the defensive line and, of course, in the secondary. They're going to be very salty, and they're going to be a top 5 defense. They should be this season. And offensively, I think they'll be better than they were last year because they'll be a little bit more consistent, even though they've lost some pieces. But the thing that really gets me going about this Alabama offense are the running backs, and Jamar Gibbs, the Georgia Tech transfer. Mm-hmm. I've actually got him listed. I actually think he might end up being the guy who ends up winning the Heisman this year. The Heisman has not been a running back trophy here of late, as it's become more of a quarterback trophy. And obviously, with Devontae Smith was a little bit different, but that's the running backs aren't as sexy anymore in offense. But I think this year Bama's going to make it sexy because Gibbs, you look at what he did at Tech, he catches the ball quite a bit. And if they get him involved like that in that Alabama offense, he can run the ball very well between the tackles, slow and kind of get back to that what Alabama used to call murder ball, 5-10 years ago where they weren't running the hurry up, no huddle.
Yeah.
They could do that with him. They could throw the ball to him. I think Jamar Gibbs, if he stays healthy and they utilize him how I think they're going to, he could and probably will be the Heisman Trophy winner if he stays on track. That Bama team is going to be able to beat you so many ways, offensively and defensively. And if they put it all together, they've got on paper what could end up being the best college football team in modern college football history.
Yeah, absolutely. Offensively, a lot of people were questioning how are they going to replace that production you lost through Jameson Williams, a transfer from Ohio State, came in and just busted it open, right? And then John Mechie, of course, as well, and now your guys for them basically coming up are going to be Jacoby Brooks and Trayshawn Holden. The transfer they got, I forget the kid's name, but he's really good, very fast. I mean, Bryce Young, of course, last year finished with 4,872 passing yards, 47 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. So I believe, again, this Alabama offense can beat you many ways, especially with a guy like Gibbs in the backfield. So do you have any team surprising us and making it into a college football playoff like Cincinnati did last year?
No, I don't see a group of 5 team, and I don't see I think there's 7, maybe 8 teams that could legitimately contend there, including maybe Texas A&M. But if A&M loses at Alabama on the road, which on October 8th, which just seems like a shoo-in, they're not going to make the playoff. I don't think Georgia's going to make the playoff.
Really?
I don't think Georgia's got quite the depth they obviously had last year on defense. That defense, as much as we want to talk about the stars that they had and still have, the depth's not quite there this year. They rotated a lot last season. You had guys that are playing 20, 25 snaps a game that you thought after the game, certainly that guy played 50 snaps. No, they rotate so much. Those guys are so fresh. That's why, that's part of why that defense was so amazing. It was a generational defense in Georgia's history. It's not going to be that this year. And I think that's going to hurt them. And they'll drop a game. They might drop 2 games this year, the way I see it. This opener against Oregon for them, I think they're going to kill Oregon personally. I don't think Oregon's going to be quite on the same page in the first game of the Dan Lanning era. They're going to a new offense. They're going to a new defense. They got some new players they have to introduce on defense that they're losing some guys. They are going to be starting a new quarterback, most likely Bo Nix, the former Auburn quarterback. And we've seen Bo Nix against Georgia in the past. He's been bad. He's gotten killed by them.
Right.
So I think that Georgia's going to look impressive, but there's going to be a game or two in there where they're going to look very mortal because of their depth defensively.
Yeah, that's fair to say. And that opener again is this Saturday against Oregon in Atlanta. So Chick-fil-A kickoff, so you guys can make sure you want to circle that. I think it's already sold out. So, but the game might be over by the second quarter. That's what it's looking like. But talk about, man, this has been a big, over the last year or so, this has been a big deal in college football, the NIL and the transfer portal. How big of an impact do you think that's had on the game and just how it's changed the scope of college football, man?
I think that it's provided number one, it's great because it's provided opportunities for every single player to make some money, get some cash in their pockets, no matter how little, but every little bit helps. That's been great. You're seeing more focus on some team wide NIL situations that are getting everybody paid on a team, which is great. But also, I think when we're talking about it actually helping a team and elevating what their roster could be. I mean, look no further than USC getting Jordan Addison from Pitt, the Biletnikoff winner, leading receiver in the country last year. I'm not so sure. I mean, maybe he goes to USC even without NIL because it's kind of the great place to be right now, and with Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams and all them. But look at Tennessee, the quarterback they get, Nico. I mean, the rumors going out there about his NIL situation and people throwing around millions of dollars. And then Miami, goodness gracious, they're killing it on the recruiting trail, which they were going to anyway with Mario Cristobal and that staff he built because he's just a relentless guy, and he was doing it at Oregon too. But now the NIL's involved, they have completely upped their game. And, Miami's in a situation where, looks like they're about to build a new stadium. They're doing all these stuff with facilities, and now they got all these millions of dollars flowing around in NIL and paying players. Miami, it's just like the two coast schools, Miami and USC. It's it's almost like it's the 80s again. That's you want to be on Miami Beach, you want to be in LA in the glitz and glam, and because there's money flowing out there. And there's money flowing there in the beach there in Miami. And that has helped their recruiting in both aspects. But when you talk about other programs, maybe being able to take that next step, people always talk about Texas A&M, and certainly they've got some big NIL situations there, but their recruiting has actually been going very well the last 4 years. Even before NIL, this past recruiting class, which was the best ever according to 24/7 Sports composite. I mean, the best ever. They were building up to that for the last 2 or 3 years. The coaches there had that circle. We know that the 2022 signing class for us is probably going to be the best we've ever had here and probably number one in the country.
Yeah.
So even before NIL, that was probably going to happen. But now it's just you add a little shot in there of adrenaline, and it made it even better. I mean, they had 4 5-star defensive linemen signed with them this year.
Yeah, man.
That's never, ever happened, and probably will never happen again, by the way, anywhere. And but NIL kind of gave them that little extra kick to make it the best class ever. And then, of course, Tennessee being able to land, a 5-star quarterback who, not to say you wouldn't have considered him anyway, I think he would have, but, it just gives you that little extra oomph. What I think is more interesting here is over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years is how this evolves, because the market's going to correct itself. Whenever there's a new business or new enterprise, there's excitement around it and people pour money into it, right?
Oh, yeah.
And then the bubble pops because you don't get as much return on your investment as you wanted. So, and this, let's face it, some of these boosters and whatever, these businesses, they're pretty much just paying players, here's, whatever, $250,000,
yeah,
to come here and you do a commercial or tweet some stuff out, but I'm really paying you just to come here because I want you to be here and I want to win a championship. And then let's say they're a bust or they don't make it. And listen, they're a bust. As much as there are superstars, they're a bust too. And so at some point the market will correct itself. People will become a little bit more cautious about throwing money at players and doing things. And then also, for that matter, and not to say everything's illegitimate, 'cause it's not, but some of these businesses who are actually all right, so I'm paying this player to do some tweets about my business and maybe a commercial, and then you come on the bottom line a year later and you see, oh, my business didn't really increase on this, or I actually lost money and this didn't help, so I'm just not going to do that anymore. I'm not going to sign up players anymore. So that could affect things too. So the market's going to correct itself in the next few years. But listen, for the most part, the big boys will remain the big boys on the block. But like there's those little pockets like USC, a Miami, a Tennessee that
Tennessee, yep.
they still got the big boys around there. It's just that they haven't been able to tap into it. And now that it's legal, you can pay players. These boosters and these business owners who have interest in those markets are going, oh, now I can maybe bring some players here to actually get us back on track. And that's really interesting to me.
Yeah, I completely agree. We weren't a couple years ago. I don't think we wouldn't see the type of it. The playing field is getting a little bit level, each year. I feel like, and you're getting more and more talent to some of these schools that are able to pay some of these players. As before, like 3 or 4 years ago, it was who was going to be the top dogs, and everybody else was just down way at the bottom at the totem pole. But now things are just getting interesting, and now the transfer portal, being able to leave, like Jameson Williams. I mean, this dude left from Ohio State and went to Alabama, became like that, just absolutely one of the best receivers in college football last year, in the blink of an eye, and so for him to be able to do that, it just shows you like this is
and he was going to
huge.
be a backup at Ohio State that year too, last year.
Right.
And he's going to be a backup, and he saw the writing on the wall and knew he could go blossom there. And here's the thing: the Ohio State coaches too. Not to get off track, but the Ohio State coaches knew too he was going to be really good. They just knew that he's probably going to have to wait another year or two. Which, and the Ohio State coaches, I talked to him about this. It's like we don't blame it at all for leaving because there was just a lot of guys in front of him, and it's going to be, and even that he's going to share a lot of snaps. And they wanted him to stay, obviously, but. No hard feelings. Like we understand,
Yeah, you get a chance to go play for Nick Saban, Alabama. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, but like I said, to their credit, you had Chris Olave and Garrett Wilson, both NFL draft picks, along with Williams in the draft this past April. So,
and they still have on paper the best receiver core in the country going into this season with Jackson Smith. Jackson is probably going to break even more records this year after we saw what he did in the Rose Bowl last year. He had almost 350 yards.
Yeah, receiving.
Listen, he's going to be a guy that he could go off for 200 yards no matter the opponent in the Big Ten this year if they throw him the ball enough.
Yeah, that game was insane when I watched that.
That's the thing. But Ohio State's got so many weapons. They're going to spread the ball around a little bit more this year with C.J. Stroud at quarterback there. They're going to spread it around a little bit more. So his numbers might go down. But if they actually it's almost like a video game for Ohio State's offense this year. Like if they want to put up, hey, Jackson, you want 250 yards this week? We'll get it for you. We'll figure it out. You'll get it. But they got so many guys, and you got to keep defenses honest. It's just there are some teams out there that are just like embarrassment of riches offensively. Ohio State this year, Alabama, I think by like week 3 or week 4 is going to be up there. They're going to get it rolling. They got some new pieces there, but I'm telling you, man, that thing is going to get rolling offensively. Tennessee, just because of the system, is just so much fun to watch, and it's fun to play in. The players love it, and that's what makes them play so much better when they play in. It's just it's kind of insane if you think back. You're a younger guy. I'm like 38. I feel like an old fossil now, but like, heck, man, 10, 15 years ago, doesn't seem that far away to me, but 10, 15 years ago, college football looked nothing like it does right now. If you told me 10, 15 years ago what Joe Burrow was going to do in 2019 with his numbers, are you insane? Go back and look all right, Cam Newton, I think, is probably a top 3 college football quarterback ever. All right.
Oh yeah, most definitely.
But you go look at his numbers. They're great, but you look at him, you're all like, oh, they're not as great as I remember. As I thought they were. You look at what Johnny Manziel was doing 2-3 years after that. It's insane, how incrementally it just seems like every year we're just breaking video game high score, stuff that I never thought we would see or could see. And it's happening every single year.
Yeah. And that's part of it is because now we're trending more of a passing game. The game is
Yes.
becoming more central towards passing the football spread. I mean, it's a lot of coaches and teams are using that system now. So speaking of which, man, real quick here, talk about who are some coaches for you that are on the hot seat this year, because there are a few.
Well, Scott Frost is number one. I don't even know if he has a seat anymore. I think he's just
Just pulled
standing
it right
in
from under him.
I think he's just standing in the fire, just going, everything's fine. I'm fine. Yeah, that guy's cooked. I mean, unless he beats Oklahoma here in a couple weeks. I mean, here's the thing: the way his contract runs right now, his buyout decreases from about $15 million to $7.5 million on October 1st. All right, I think their writing's on the wall. They got Oklahoma here in a few weeks, and then October 1st on a Saturday is the day they play Indiana at home. You lose to Indiana at home. I don't care how good Indiana has been in recent history, winning 7-8 games, and then last year they had an off year. But you lose to Indiana at home, he's cooked. He'll be gone that next morning, October 2nd. Outside of Scott Frost, which is the easiest thing to say right now, I'm not so sure we're going to have a robust coaching carousel this year. We had 29 head coaching changes this past year, which I think is the second most in college football history, according to the data I was compiling back in the offseason. I'm not so sure we get anywhere close to that this year, because you look across the country and you're like, okay, who makes sense? There's really no big jobs that are going to come open. I mean, Nebraska, you could argue, is a big job, but it's not. Nebraska's just not like top 25 job anymore.
Right.
It used to be. I mean, 2002 or 3, it was. That thing's fallen off. There's an entire. There's a whole book that someone should write about. Like Nebraska and Miami, those were like the it schools. Miami was the it school of the 80s. Nebraska came on the scene, was like amazing to watch because they're so different in the 90s, and then it's just fallen off. There's an entire generation of Nebraska fans who know nothing but losing. And it's amazing. And everybody else just so accustomed to winning 10, 11, 12 games a year there. And now they're just terrible. So you got this interesting contrast of anybody who's over 35 or 40 there just thinking I can't believe this has become what it is. And then everybody below that going, yeah, we just suck. It's crazy. There's no other fan base, I think, in America like that right now. It's fascinating. Let's see. Who do you think out there? Give me a checklist and I'll tell you what I think. Because I'm trying to think of names. I'm drawing blanks, man.
Definitely Scott Frost. But for me, I would have to say, I'm not sure. That is a hard question, man.
There's not a lot of.
Could Steve Sarkisian? Could that be a name possibly?
I don't think so. I think they'll give him another couple of years because they're about to go in the SEC, and you can't make another coaching change so quickly.
Right.
I mean, unless they just crap the bed, but I don't see that happening. Man, I'd have to go look.
Yeah, it's a pretty tough question.
Yeah, I mean, it's especially because I'm so plugged into what's going on this. All right. So you're in Georgia, obviously. Jeff Collins at Georgia Tech.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm surprised he's lasted this long.
Well, I thought he was going to get fired last year, but there was a difficult situation. This is it for him. He's got to get them to close to 500 to get to a bowl game.
Yeah, this is it. Especially, yeah. I mean, and you lose Jamar Gibbs, who was one of your better players. And they still got some talented guys out there, but just the culture, man, it's just not there.
I mean, an interesting name to watch. A couple of names would be Mike Norvell at Florida State.
Okay, yeah.
They're at an inflection point. I know it's just been a couple of years there, and a lot of people want to say 2020 was kind of like a throwaway year for him in his first year, COVID year, but I mean, everybody had to play in that. So,
yeah.
Okay. I understand it was difficult, but he's got a lot of pressure this year. Neil Brown at West Virginia. They got a huge opener, against Pitt as we're recording this right now. That's huge for them. I'd say Willie Taggart at FAU, but I actually got FAU winning Conference USA this year, or being second. They're really deep this year. I really like them. Yeah, there's just not a lot of like really big jobs out there. That I think that last year was our big turnover year
Yeah, it
with the
was.
big jobs.
It definitely was, but it'll be a very interesting college football season, and I'm glad that you came on, Brandon, and talk some ball with us today. Make sure you guys go check Brandon's content out there over at 24/7 Sports. That great stuff they put out there. Of course, they're going to have everything covered college football as we enter the big weekend here this weekend. So, Brandon, thank you, man, for joining us, and you have a great rest of your day.
All right, you too. Thanks, man.
Of course, no problem.